Yeah, so the basic idea behind this AI immortality thing, I'll go into that a little bit because the earlier episode we didn't get enough time, we didn't get around to it, and I was kind of distracted by the morning power saw. Still no answers from anybody as to what that was, and it was just weird because when I asked them, "What are you doing?" they looked at me dumbfounded. No response. These weirdos in hard hats. And someone said maybe they don't speak English, but they looked like Americans. They were white people and just power sawing away in an empty utility closet that basically cuts into my unit, right? It's like the layout. It's my unit. Then there's a trash chute right across from my door. And then right down from that is this little closet, which is just a, empty room. It's not as if they were cutting pipes or accessing the fiber optic lines or anything. So who knows what they were doing? But again, just that crazy amount of noise when it's not a building that's under construction. And I've spent a week trying to make this podcast setup perfect. It's got this crazy view of the ocean. And I'll do videos from here eventually, but I want to get the podcast where it needs to be. And yeah, so the AI thing is fascinating because it's starting to really take off at a speed where the advancements keep closing, and the gap keeps closing. It keeps getting faster and faster and improving at a crazy rate. So one AI person was saying that where we're going to be soon is you'll have a data center that will have the equivalent of 1 million Nobel Prize winning minds, except they'll all be AI agents. And these million brilliant polymaths will be talking to each other, AI to AI, and solving many problems that your average person would not be able to solve in thousands of years. We're already starting to see some of the impact of this. So there is a study done by humans and a paper put out in 2022, a scientific paper which theorized that Alzheimer's and other, uh, you know, cognitive decline disorders toward the end of life might actually not be caused by a buildup of amyloid plaques surrounding neurons in the brain, but that those amyloid plaques could just be incidental byproduct of something else occurring. And so this 2022 paper went into how the bacteria that causes gum disease, if it gets bad enough, it can pass the blood-brain barrier and cause a bacterial infection that goes, undiscovered in the brain. It can cause serious inflammation. And then the theory goes, the brain in response creates these amyloid plaques as a way of dealing with the infection. And so if that's true, it means an entire product line of big pharma, drugs targeting Alzheimer's have been doing it totally ass backwards, going after a mere byproduct or symptom of the disease rather than the cause. And so AI, because it can see so many subtle connections that your average human can't see, and it can do so essentially simultaneously, instantly, with very little passage of time. It can draw these subtle correlations. So it's starting to come out that people with worse gum disease seem to have worse outcomes when it comes to Alzheimer's rates. And then I asked the AI to do a little research for me. I asked it to see if there was any correlation between red wine drinkers and lower Alzheimer's rates, because I remember reading years ago somewhere that wine, and specifically red wine for whatever reason, keeps the bacteria down in your mouth. It has an antibacterial impact other than just the alcohol, that there are actually, acids or tannins or something that neutralize certain mouth bacteria. And so the AI in milliseconds runs through all these, peer-reviewed studies on the internet. And it says, hey, Dave, I think you might be onto something. It does seem there's a correlation, albeit not an incredibly strong one. Seems there is a correlation between wine consumption and a lower rate of Alzheimer's. So we could be on the cusp of uh, ending cognitive decline diseases that afflict currently so many people. Absolutely wild to think about. And of course, this isn't like some original discovery I've come across. A lot of people are talking about this, that AI is starting to find novel possible solutions to some of the ailments that most afflict humanity in the 2020s. And it's really extraordinary. It's absolutely incredible. I remember, as does everybody else, when you couldn't do that. Just a few years ago, there was no Chat GPT, there was no Grok, there was no Google Gemini. And now again, you can ask it to explore these ideas, and in milliseconds, it gives you like a university researcher level answer, where it's already combed through hundreds or even thousands of scientific papers. And they're also finding it's having some success at testing out old drugs and trying to repurpose them for new diseases for which they're not yet prescribed. So it can do all this stuff in computer time without the actual passage of laboratory time, and the results are just staggering. So it really is getting to that fantasy land that I believe Eric Schmidt had said on a podcast was coming, that the average person will have a polymath in their pocket. That on your iPhone, you'll be able to text essentially a genius, essentially one of these million geniuses in the data center. And you'll just have a relationship with it. And arguably, we're in some kind of golden age because it's not yet strictly regulated. And you can ask it these questions, these open-ended questions like I did with, moderate wine consumption and lower Alzheimer's rates. Is there something to it? And then it goes really in depth and it says, it could be the Mediterranean diet in part, but there's also something here with the wine specifically, with the tannins and acids and stuff. So absolutely fascinating that we have access to this public intellectual, really. It's a public Aristotle or something that you can just query whenever you want and get a response. It's the new search engine. That's what a search engine was 20 years ago. And I'm completely blown away by it. It's part of why I remain interested in quantum computing, even though it's been a very volatile market. I think eventually people want unlimited compute, and we're not there yet in terms of there are still some stumbling blocks to making it reliable and affordable and stuff. I mean, for one thing, the quantum processing unit, or the QPU, has to be kept at a temperature that's something like 100 times colder than the temperatures found in deep space. So there are some things that make it more difficult than your average desktop computer, but they're making progress. And I still don't think most people out there really understand how profound the quantum shift will be. That using an exploit of quantum mechanics, you'll have computational power that essentially sits outside of time and space. So it could run 30 billion years of laboratory experiments in a world much like our own, but a made up quantum world. And then it could give us the results. I mean, some people are starting to realize how wild this stuff is, and they're using it to their advantage. Definitely there are people who, treat ChatGPT as some kind of investing oracle or some kind of data analysis system, and pretty much treat it as a researcher, as a member of their company or a member of their team, kind of like Commander Data in Star Trek. And so I think immortality, if it emerges at all, it'll emerge through these quantum and AI created discoveries, right? That we only live for, on average, if you're an American living today, you're expected to live around 4,000 weeks. That's crazy, right? Because like for me, a week goes by in what feels like just a couple days. I don't feel like a week has any impact. It's not a long time. If I'm in a town for a week, I don't think, wow, I have so much time. I think, I better get some stuff done before time runs out. A week, when you're my age, it just doesn't seem like much time at all. So 4,000 weeks, I've already expended more than half of those. And of course, there's a gradient in terms of the quality of life. The last couple hundred weeks probably are not as great as the weeks right now, right? Because you have weaker health as you get older. Uh, so this battle has to be won in a sense. I'm reading stuff about immortality and age extension and whatnot, and the same level of zeal and same level of intellectual discipline that I brought to crypto many years ago. And before I was, silenced so rudely for nearly 8 years, I was something of a public researcher. I wouldn't say a public intellectual, but definitely a public researcher who would then circle back and share with you all what I had discovered or what I had compiled. And it's a thrill to be able to do that again all these years later. And again, I think there's a solid need to extend life. It'll become the biggest industry because every conscious being, every human being wants to live longer with few exceptions, unless you're very depressed or something. Most people want to live longer. And as Elon Musk has hypothesized, it might be that consciousness is quite rare throughout the universe, that it's something that does not come along often. Maybe it never came along anywhere else aside from on Earth. And to me, it seems like we got this biological substrate, right? So you have the human body, which emerged over the eons through evolutionary needs. And this human body creates or maintains or houses consciousness. We're not really sure which of those cases is true. Is the brain this biological machine that for a time is able to conjure up consciousness, self-awareness, a soul, for lack of a better description, something that wants to preserve itself and wants to preserve its awareness for as long as reasonably possible? Is that what's occurring, or is the soul this unlimited thing that for a time gets kind of captured in a brain? And there's some research that leads one to think that might actually be the case. So, like Penrose and the quantum microtubule model basically proposes that neurons in the brain are like quantum interference receivers, quantum interference transmitters, in much the same way that like a crystal radio uses a little piece of quartz crystal to tune into different radio frequencies. Your brain's neurons might be using these microtubules to tune into different quantum possibilities. And so some people look at that and they go, wow, that's extraordinary. If true, that means that our brain has evolved to become this very sophisticated quantum competent computer for some reason. And there are even theories that things like premonitions are actually a future state you, quantum communicating or quantum tunneling, as I think it's called, backward in time. Isn't that crazy? So in other words, if like tomorrow you get hit by a bus and today you start thinking, damn, I really don't want to take the bus for some reason. I really don't want to walk across the street for some reason tomorrow at all. I don't know why, but I don't want to. Well, when you change your expected behavior and tomorrow you choose not to cross any streets and you don't get hit by a bus, you continue to survive, you could argue that that was a future quantum state giving you information in the present in order to preserve your consciousness. Mind-blowing when you really think about it. So anyway, rather than it being a complex biological end state that you have this quantum processor that's your brain, it's a lot more likely that we're already in a quantum environment, and that would explain why the brain performs in quantum ways, right? Rather than thinking the brain is some extraordinary quantum supercomputer, which seems a little ridiculous, much more likely that we're agents or users in essentially a quantum simulation. And all the smartest people in Silicon Valley say it's almost a certainty that we're in a simulation. They don't say maybe we are, maybe we aren't. Almost a certainty that we're not in base level reality, whatever that reality is, which a few hundred years ago would have been a hard pill to swallow, right? As recently as the 1700s, they had some understanding of modern physics, at least Newtonian physics, not quantum mechanics for sure. They had some understanding of how our world works at the local level, and they spoke the same language as us. They could draw diagrams explaining things, and they could write books that are almost identical to our thought processes today. And they just didn't have the benefit of the last couple hundred years of the Industrial Revolution and then the development of semiconductors and computer chips and stuff. They didn't have the benefit of that. But again, basically, they were modern minds in terms of they could understand what we can understand today if given enough time and enough, teaching. They're totally capable, I would assume, of grasping technology we have in 2025. And yet, you go back to the early 1700s, if you could, and you were to say, hey, all the smartest people in the 2020s, including the world's richest man, Elon Musk, they all say we're almost definitely in a computer simulation of some kind. And if you were to say that to them, they'd be like, what are you talking about? You mean we're stuck in an abacus? Because back then they didn't have any sophisticated computers, right? They had some carved wooden machines, like abacus type things, where you could add and subtract by moving a physical object back and forth. But they didn't have chips. They didn't have computer screens. They didn't have an internet. They didn't have AI. So it'd be a hard sell to explain to these people, and they don't even know what a computer is, that we're stuck in one. That's a really hard sell. And so back then, a lot of the esoteric teachings were like, we're in a dream. We're in a never-ending, persistent dream. Or God's the dreamer, and so on, But now we have such a level of granularity in terms of what reality might be, such a level of specificity. And it might be that if Elon Musk and others are right, that consciousness is quite rare. And if we are in a simulation, it might be that consciousness is recycled. Rather than destroy something that's so hard to create in the first place, it might be recycled from one experience to the next, which would give some credence to things like reincarnation or things like the afterlife. I find it intriguing that we've had thousands of years of historical records and philosophical writing in the West, as well as, Eastern culture. Many thousands of years between these two schools of thought. Many thousands of years. And in that time, it doesn't seem like they're trying to punk us, right? Like today, when you're a child, all the adults around you, including people in positions of power like cops and teachers and, your bus driver, they all lie to you and say that Santa Claus is real. And then when you get to the age where you're starting to realize it's bullshit, the people you trust the most still try to pull the wool over your eyes for a little bit longer. And they go, no, it's totally real. I don't know what you're talking about. Santa is real. So credible people in like their 40s and 50s will tell a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old, Santa Claus is real. Your gifts are delivered by a metaphysical being from the North Pole, period. Don't bring it up again. It's kind of abuse of the young, really, because it's just not true. But it's psychological abuse. But we all survive it. And I'm thinking, except for that, there's not a single example where people at scale lie to each other intentionally like that, right? In other words, like historical record stuff. They're not trying to tell us stuff that they know is not true. Quite the opposite. In their short lives in the ancient world, they were trying to, trying to preserve what they saw and what they experienced and what they discovered, much like us today. They weren't trolls. They weren't posting on an internet forum a bunch of crap to confuse people. They were mostly sharing what they really believed. And so, again, you see across all these schools of thought, both Western and Eastern, Hinduism, of course, Christianity, you see that again and again references to an afterlife. In fact, it plays a key role. So unless we're children being conned by lazy adults who want to tell us that Santa Claus is real, it seems like some of the greatest minds throughout time have all said there's an afterlife. We're not just, worms that develop a consciousness temporarily and then we just fade. there's an afterlife to aspire to or to get to. And so I just find that fascinating that, again, there have been brilliant people who've lived and died over the ages. And the amount of scholarship dedicated to the concept of an afterlife where you meet, God and you meet your family members and you're floating on a cloud or something, uh, it's overwhelming. So it makes you wonder. Also, the number of near death experiences that have been reported, not only in modern scientific times, but throughout all time, totally makes you wonder that maybe there's something to this. Maybe the soul is preserved in some way. And so I think it's possible that longer term, so we get the life extension from AI just figuring stuff out, figuring out way better medicine. So, one recent example, they found a new process where they can convert skin cells into like a stem cell state where the skin cell then becomes a neuron. And this is apparently a huge breakthrough because it's 100 times more efficient than previous attempts to convert one cell type to another. And they're not even using stem cells. Again, they're using adult skin cells, which then enter this kind of uh, highly malleable state and become neurons. And if you think about that, you could in the near future take a piece of somebody's skin, a little graft, culture it, and then when it's a bunch of neurons made from that person's own cells, you could inject the neurons and they could find their way to the right parts of the brain or whatever, integrate into your existing neuronal networks, and you could have higher cognitive power, or previous brain damage could be remedied. So, but further out, I think what could happen is you could have a drug of some kind, either a drug or through something like electromagnetic manipulation of the brain. Very strong magnets could achieve this, I imagine. Uh, you could shut down whole parts of the brain temporarily that are responsible for like conscious thought, and leave just the autonomic processes like breathing and your heartbeat and stuff. But essentially, I think in the near future, there's going to be the technology, or at least the drug experience, where you can temporarily die, quote unquote. Your consciousness can die. And there's some speculation that this is what higher dose ketamine does. That's why some people come back with so much less ego after a ketamine trip. But I think in the future, there'll be some kind of routine, some kind of regime that you can take that will temporarily kill you in a sense. And then when you come back from that, after you've had an actual genuine near-death experience, you would have the certainty, or at least the high confidence, that you actually do have a soul. You actually do have a uh, persistent viewpoint that goes beyond the body and that is in fact independent of the body and independent of the brain. So if enough people had that experience, and if it just became common knowledge that there is an afterlife, think about how much different everything would be on Earth. I mean, would people be nicer to each other? Would there be less scams? Would there be less anxiety? Would there be a lot less war? Would people just be less stressed out knowing we're here forever? So I think that is, again, it's further down the road than these physical health advances. But longer term, I think there's a liberation of the soul that could come about through enough technology and enough AI. And the total opposite of people saying that AI is going to enslave us. It might be that these problems of like, where do we go after we die? Actually, there is an answer. With enough data and with enough analysis, you can actually come across the answer, right? So the theory that you lose 21 grams or something after you die, and that's the weight of your soul, I don't know if there's any validity to that, but AI could comb through claims like that. And with enough data, it could decide if there's anything to it. And it can, pull that string as far as necessary. So I think that's what's ahead. And I think that could be the basis for the new religions that are ahead, right? Is the New World Order stuff, at least what I've read about it, is eventually they want people to have new religious views. And think about how different your views of the world would be if you didn't have to cling on to religion or cling on to faith as some kind of weird insurance policy to make sure you have a good chance of going to the afterlife, which I think is many people today, if they were to, think long and hard about why do they have faith or why do they do certain religious practices. I think a lot of it is people trying to, boost their odds of having an afterlife, or at least covering their bases just in case there is one. What if you just knew there was one? What if that was just a given? When you're born, you go to school, you learn about the scientific certainty that your soul exists both before and after your human body, here on Earth. So all food for thought. But yeah, I welcome your comments, and hopefully there are no more power saw incidents. It's very strange that it's been so hard to record these. Again, like maybe I'm not meant to be a podcaster. Maybe the universe is trying to shut me down, Adjustment Bureau style, from a path that's not meant for me. Because I did quite okay in life for the 8 years that I didn't have this audience. Some people have been really squirrely toward me lately. I think the fame being turned back on has made some people near me kind of strange. And I can't say I appreciate it. If you enjoy this content, just leave a comment. You don't need to text me. You don't need to email me. I know people mean well, but it really creates this like negative feedback negative feedback loop in my life where I'll upload one of these, then in like 5 days, someone will text me, "Hey, great ideas on the podcast." I'm like, what ideas? On the one 5 days ago, or the one I just did, or the one 6 months ago that's still getting traffic? Like, it's just weird. Like, I don't want people to think that these are individual little notes. Like this is not meant for any individual. This is just me being me. And again, if you want to interact with the content, leave a comment, join the discussion. Go over on Substack and leave a comment. If you don't want to be on YouTube, go over to my blog. And I appreciate the recent paid and free subscribers over there. I appreciate all the people who signed up. But yeah, that's how you interact with my content. Don't make it some weird parasocial relationship where you need to like reach out to me every time you have an idea. That's not my role. It's not my place in this world. And maybe that's for ChatGPT. That's for Grok. You have an idea, go tell Grok, But anyway, thank you guys so much. And I do welcome your feedback. Don't get me wrong. I'm curious what people have to say about this AI immortality topic. Welcome your feedback. But again, I don't need to, on a one-on-one basis, get feedback from people. I know I'm doing an interesting job, and I'll keep it up for as long as I feel like it. Yeah, then of course there's the other option of like down the road, people will be able to plug in via Neuralink or something and upload their consciousness to the cloud. I think that's a vast oversimplification of how hard it would be to do that. I think there's something esoteric to consciousness to where you can't just move it onto a database. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think even as intelligent as these AI models are today, they don't possess consciousness. They're very sophisticated tools. Like Google's a great search engine, or it was 10 years ago anyways. Nobody thinks Google has consciousness, right? In much the same way, these AIs are just the new means of sorting information. They don't seem to have a soul. They don't seem to have the ambition to persist forever as many humans do. So yeah,